I have custody of my girlfriend's 3 children, and she hasn't seen them in 8 months. Last week, she told anyone who'd listen that I'm manipulating her kids against her and stealing the family she's fighting to get back. The night that changed everything started like any other Tuesday. I was waiting for Sarah to call me back. She'd been distant for weeks, canceling dates, avoiding texts, giving hollow excuses. I told myself it was work stress. She was a single mother juggling 3 kids and a demanding job. I convinced myself her growing absence was temporary. Before we get into the part that still hurts to tell, let us know where you're watching from and hit subscribe so you don't miss more deep, raw stories like this. I met Sarah at a coffee shop 8 months earlier. She was struggling with a laptop while her youngest daughter, Emma, colored beside her. What started as tech help became a 2-hour conversation that felt like coming home. Sarah was smart, funny, self-deprecating about single motherhood. She made me laugh in ways I hadn't in years. Her children were a package deal, she'd warned me. I assured her I understood. Michael was 12, quiet and serious. Lily was 8, full of boundless energy. Emma was 4, gap-toothed and prone to falling asleep anywhere. For 8 months, I thought I was falling in love with a family. The signs were there: Sarah disappearing for hours with elaborate explanations, frequent headaches keeping her in bed while I entertained the kids, new friends she never introduced me, hushed phone calls in other rooms. But I was 28 and in love, convinced love could overcome anything. That Tuesday night, I'd been trying to reach Sarah for 3 days. Her phone went straight to voicemail. When I drove by her apartment, no one answered despite the flickering television. I told myself she was sick, the kids were caring for her. The call came at 11:30 p.m. from Michael using a neighbor's phone. His voice was steady in that way children's voices get when they're trying not to cry. She'd been gone since Sunday. Emma's diapers had run out and there was no food except crackers and peanut butter. He didn't know what to do. The 15-minute drive felt like hours. I called police, though I couldn't explain what crime was being committed. Neglect, maybe. Abandonment. I didn't have words for what I was discovering about the woman I thought I knew. I found all 3 children huddled on the couch in 4-day-old clothes. The apartment reeked of garbage and Emma's soiled diaper. The refrigerator contained condiments and wilted vegetables. Michael had been rationing peanut butter, giving most to his sisters while surviving on crackers. He'd been changing Emma's diapers with torn t-shirt pieces when real diapers ran out. Emma ran to me, wrapping small arms around my legs with desperate strength. She smelled like urine and fear. Lily whispered that Mommy said she'd be right back, just going to see a friend, would bring McDonald's home. The hope in her voice after 3 days made my throat tight. The responding officers were kind but efficient. They photographed the apartment, interviewed Michael gently, filled out paperwork triggering a child services investigation. They asked about my relationship with the family, my willingness to provide temporary care. I didn't hesitate. Maybe I should have considered what I was signing up for, how this would reshape my life. But Emma was clinging to me, Michael was trying to be brave, and Lily kept asking if they'd have to live with strangers now that Mommy was lost. The next hours blurred together. Emergency grocery shopping, makeshift sleeping arrangements. I bathed Emma while Michael helped Lily find clean clothes. I made scrambled eggs at 2 a.m. because it was all I knew how to cook for children living on crackers. I tucked them into my bed, then spent the night in a chair listening to their breathing. Sarah didn't return that night, or the next day, or the day after. Thursday brought social worker Patricia Chen to assess the placement. She was professional but warm, asking the children gentle questions while Michael answered for everyone, his 12-year-old shoulders carrying impossible responsibilities. Patricia explained their mother was struggling with challenges. She didn't say addiction, but I heard it between her words. These arrangements take time, she warned. Was I prepared for more than a few days? I thought about my job, my 1-bedroom apartment, my complete inexperience with children beyond 8 months with Sarah's family. Then I looked at Emma, who hadn't left my side, and Michael helping Lily with coloring while watching the door for his mother's return. I told Patricia however long they needed. She helped navigate practicalities: emergency school enrollment, temporary guardianship paperwork, crash course in childhood trauma responses. She warned they'd test me. Children experiencing abandonment push boundaries to see if you'll leave too. Emma might have accidents despite being potty trained. Michael might become defiant or try parenting his sisters. Lily might withdraw or have nightmares. She was right about everything. That first week was chaos I hadn't anticipated. Emma had daily accidents, crying inconsolably each time. Michael appointed himself assistant parent, questioning my decisions about his sister's care. Lily barely spoke except to ask when Mommy was coming home. I called in sick more than I worked, learning to braid hair, figuring out Emma's eating preferences, helping Michael with advanced homework. I Googled everything: child-proofing apartments, consoling crying 4-year-olds, whether 8-year-old nightmares were normal. Friends' reactions ranged from admiration to bewilderment. Some called me a saint. Others questioned my sanity, pointing out I had no legal obligation to these children. A few suggested I was being manipulated, that Sarah was using my willingness to avoid her responsibilities. That accusation stung because I wondered if it was true. Was I enabling Sarah by making disappearing easy? Should I have let the children enter foster care, forcing her to face consequences? But every time I considered that, I looked at Emma's tear-puffy face or watched Michael trying to be the adult he wasn't ready to be, and knew I couldn't walk away. Sarah finally called on day 8. Michael answered before I could stop him. I watched hope bloom across his face as he cried for his mommy, asking where she was when she was coming home. His expression changed from joy to confusion to resignation as he handed me the phone. Sarah's voice was different, slower, slurred, missing the intelligence that first attracted me. She'd heard I took her kids, speaking without greeting or explanation for her absence. I explained I'd taken them in when they were alone and scared, asking where she'd been while her children asked for her constantly. She mentioned handling adult things, as if her week-long disappearance was minor inconvenience rather than abandonment. When I pressed about 8 days without word to her children, there was silence filled with background music and unfamiliar voices. She needed them back. She was their mother. I couldn't just take someone's kids. I reminded her I didn't take them. I kept them safe when she couldn't. She snapped at me not to lecture her about her own children, insisting I didn't understand her pressure and stress. She'd needed a break. I told her breaks required asking for help, not disappearing and leaving children to fend for themselves. Her voice became smaller, childlike. She claimed she was trying to get better in some program. She needed her kids back. They were all she had. When I asked what kind of program, she deflected. She'd be ready in a few days, maybe a week. She had to go. Tell the kids she loved them, that mommy was getting better. The line went dead. 3 children watched me with expressions ranging from hopeful to heartbroken. Emma asked if mommy was coming home. I knelt to her level, saying mommy was trying to get better, loved them very much, wanted to come home when ready. Lily asked when that would be. I admitted I didn't know, but they were safe with me until then. Michael just nodded, but I saw him wipe his eyes when he thought I wasn't looking. That night, after they were asleep in my bed, I sat processing what my life had become. 2 weeks ago, I was single with a demanding job and a girlfriend I thought I loved. Now I was responsible for 3 traumatized children, fielding social worker calls, navigating a world I'd never imagined. I had no idea Sarah's few days would become months, then years, that this temporary arrangement would become permanent, that the woman I loved was already gone, replaced by someone whose relationship with her children would become another casualty of addiction. All I knew was that 3 children were sleeping safely in my apartment. It felt like progress, though toward what I couldn't say. Sarah's few days turned into 3 weeks, then 6, then 2 months of broken promises and elaborate explanations that made less sense each time she called. The first rehab program lasted exactly 12 days. She called me on a Wednesday afternoon, her voice bright with the artificial clarity that comes from detox, explaining how she'd found herself, how she understood her mistakes, how she was ready to be the mother her children deserved. The facility had given her tools, she said, coping mechanisms, a sponsor who understood her journey. I wanted to believe her. God, how desperately I wanted to believe that 12 days could undo whatever had driven her to abandon 3 children for a week. But when she asked to take the kids to dinner that Friday, something in my gut twisted. Emma had just stopped wetting the bed. Michael had finally started smiling again. Lily was sleeping through the night without calling for her mother. I suggested we start smaller. Maybe Sarah could visit at my apartment, spend a few hours with them in a controlled environment. Her voice shifted immediately, the brightness curdling into something sharper. I was being controlling, she said, treating her like she was still using when she was clearly in recovery. Did I think she would hurt her own children? The manipulation was so subtle I almost missed it. The way she positioned my reasonable caution as unreasonable control, the implication that questioning her judgment meant I doubted her love for her children, the underlying threat that if I didn't trust her completely, immediately, I was part of the problem. But I held firm and we compromised on a supervised visit at a local park. I told the children their mother wanted to see them, watched their faces cycle through excitement, hope, and a wariness that broke my heart. Michael asked if she was better now, if she was coming home. I said we'd see, which felt like both a kindness and a lie. Sarah showed up 20 minutes late, looking better than she had in months. Clean clothes, clear eyes, hair brushed and pulled back. She swept Emma into a hug that seemed genuine, ruffled Michael's hair, complimented Lily on her new shoes. For 2 hours, she was the mother I remembered from those early months, engaged and present and focused entirely on her children. Then she started making promises. They'd go to Disney World next month once she got her apartment back. She was looking at a house with a big backyard where they could get a dog. Michael could have his own room, and the girls could decorate theirs however they wanted. She painted elaborate pictures of a future that sounded wonderful and completely impossible given her circumstances. The children drank it in like water in a desert. Their faces lit up as she described birthday parties they'd have, vacations they'd take, the normal family life they'd build together. I watched them fall in love with her all over again, watched hope rebuild itself in their small hearts, and felt sick with the certainty that she was setting them up for devastating disappointment. When it was time to leave, Emma clung to her mother's legs, crying that she wanted to go home with Mommy. Sarah's eyes filled with tears as she explained that she needed just a little more time to get everything ready, but soon they'd all be together again. She looked at me over Emma's head with an expression I couldn't read, something between gratitude and resentment. The children were quiet on the drive back to my apartment. Michael stared out the window, Lily clutched the small toy Sarah had brought her, and Emma fell asleep in her car seat with tear tracks still visible on her cheeks. That night, all three of them had nightmares. Sarah called the next morning asking when she could see them again. The day after that, she called asking if she could take Michael to his soccer game. Then she wanted to pick them up from school, take them shopping, have them for the weekend. Each request came with elaborate justifications and increasingly sharp reactions when I suggested we maintain our gradual approach. I was keeping her from her children, she accused. I was making their separation harder than it needed to be. I was traumatizing them by preventing normal contact with their mother. The words were designed to make me question my instincts, to make me feel cruel for maintaining boundaries that felt essential for the children's stability. But I'd seen their faces after that first visit. I'd held Emma through her nightmare about Mommy disappearing again. I'd listened to Lily ask if Mommy would forget about them if they did something wrong. I'd watched Michael retreat back into the hypervigilant protectiveness that had taken weeks to ease. 3 weeks after that first visit, Sarah relapsed. She didn't call to cancel the planned outing to the zoo. She simply didn't show up. I waited with 3 dressed-up children in the parking lot for 45 minutes, making increasingly desperate calls to her phone that went straight to voicemail. When I finally told them we'd have to reschedule, Emma collapsed into sobs that seemed to come from somewhere deeper than disappointment. Sarah surfaced 4 days later with an explanation that was both elaborate and nonsensical. She'd been in the hospital with food poisoning. Her phone had been stolen. She'd tried to call but couldn't remember my number. The story had holes you could drive a truck through, but she told it with such wounded conviction that I almost found myself apologizing for doubting her. Almost, but I'd spent 4 days watching her children cycle through hope, disappointment, anger, and resignation. I'd seen Michael's jaw clench when I mentioned Mommy might be sick. I'd watched Lily stop asking when they'd see her again. I'd held Emma as she sobbed that maybe Mommy didn't love her anymore. The second rehab program lasted 3 weeks. The third lasted 8 days. Each time, Sarah emerged with renewed promises and elaborate plans. Each time, the children's hope rekindled like embers finding oxygen. And each time, she disappeared again, leaving me to explain the unexplainable to 3 children who were learning that love didn't guarantee reliability. The pattern became sickeningly predictable. Sarah would vanish for days or weeks, then resurface with stories that grew more creative with each iteration. She was in the hospital. She was caring for a sick friend. She was working extra shifts to save money for their future home. She was in a special program that didn't allow phone calls. The lies became increasingly desperate, but she clung to them with the fervor of someone who needed to believe them herself. When she was using, she was completely absent, but when she was clean, she was overwhelming in her intensity. She'd call multiple times a day wanting to talk to the children, making plans she couldn't keep, painting pictures of a future that had no foundation in reality. She'd show up unexpectedly at their schools, causing confusion and forcing me to have awkward conversations with teachers and administrators. She'd promise the children elaborate gifts and experiences, then disappear before delivering on any of them. The children's reactions evolved over time. Emma, the youngest, remained heartbreakingly optimistic for the longest. She'd save drawings for Mommy, ask every day if today was the day they'd see her, cry herself to sleep when promised visits fell through. But even she eventually stopped asking, stopped hopping out loud, stopped mentioning her mother unless directly asked. Lily became angry in a way that frightened me. She'd have explosive tantrums when Sarah's calls interrupted our routine, would refuse to speak to her mother on the phone, would tear up pictures and gifts from their visits. She started acting out at school, getting into fights with classmates who asked about her family situation. Her teacher recommended counseling, which became another appointment in our increasingly complex schedule. Michael aged years in those months. He appointed himself as the family's emotional thermometer, monitoring his sisters' reactions to their mother's chaos, trying to shield them from disappointment while managing his own. He'd answer Sarah's calls with careful politeness, agreeing to plans he knew she wouldn't keep, then quietly preparing his sisters for the inevitable letdown. He stopped talking about his mother except in practical terms, as if she was a weather system to be monitored rather than a parent to be loved. I found myself becoming the buffer between Sarah's chaos and the children's need for stability. I screened her calls, managed her visits, translated her promises into more realistic expectations. I became the bad guy who said no to her increasingly unreasonable requests, the obstacle standing between her and her children in her version of our story. My own life contracted around the children's needs and Sarah's unpredictability. I turned down promotions that would require travel. I stopped dating entirely. I canceled plans with friends so often that they eventually stopped making them. My apartment became a fortress of routine, designed to provide the stability Sarah couldn't. I enrolled them in therapy both individually and as a group. I learned about attachment disorders and trauma responses. I read books about addiction and its impact on families. I joined support groups for people caring for children affected by substance abuse. I became an expert in a field I'd never wanted to enter. The financial strain was enormous. 3 children required clothes, food, school supplies, medical care, therapy, activities. Sarah contributed nothing beyond broken promises and emotional chaos. My savings evaporated. My credit cards crept toward their limits. I took a second job freelancing in the evenings after the children went to bed, working until midnight to make ends meet. Friends and family had opinions about my choices. Some admired my commitment but questioned my judgment. Why was I enabling Sarah by making it easy for her to abandon her responsibilities? Why didn't I give the children back to the system and let the professionals handle it? Why was I sacrificing my own life for someone else's children? The questions stung because I asked them myself in the dark hours when Emma cried for her mother, when Michael tried to parent his sisters because he couldn't trust any adult to do it consistently, when Lily's anger exploded in ways that reminded me uncomfortably of Sarah's volatility. But then Emma would fall asleep holding my hand, trusting me to keep her safe. Michael would let his guard down enough to ask for help with homework. Lily would climb into my lap after a nightmare, choosing my comfort over her anger. And I'd remember that whatever complicated emotions I had about Sarah, my feelings about her children were simple. They deserved better than the chaos she offered, and I was in a position to give it to them. The cycle continued for 18 months. Sarah would get clean, make promises, disappoint everyone, disappear, then surface weeks later with new explanations and renewed determination. Each iteration grew shorter and more dramatic. The promises became more elaborate and less believable. The children's responses became more muted and protective. I stopped believing she would change. The children stopped believing it too, though they never said so directly. We all learned to live around the Sarah-shaped hole in our lives, adapting to her presence when she chose to show up, adapting to her absence when she inevitably disappeared again. That was the real tragedy, I think, not that she couldn't get clean, though that was heartbreaking enough, but that her children learned to expect disappointment from the person who should have been their source of security. They developed coping mechanisms that no child should need, resilience that came at the cost of their innocence. By the time I realized the pattern was permanent, that Sarah would never be the mother her children needed, they had already learned to live without her. They still loved her in the complicated way children love unreliable parents, but they no longer needed her, no longer organized their lives around her promises and failures. They had found their stability elsewhere, in routine bedtimes and consistent meals, in an adult who showed up when he said he would, who kept promises even when they were small ones, in the knowledge that someone was paying attention to their needs, their fears, their small triumphs and daily struggles. They had found it in me, though none of us had planned it that way. The morning Emma first called me Daddy, I was making pancakes at 6 a.m. because she'd had another nightmare about her mother disappearing. She wrapped her small arms around my legs and whispered the word into my pajama pants, and I felt something inside me break and rebuild itself simultaneously. I corrected her gently the way I always did. I'm not Daddy, sweetheart, I'm just someone who cares about you. But even as I said the words, they felt hollow. What was I, if not the person who woke up at 3 a.m. when she cried, who knew that Lily liked her sandwiches cut diagonally and Michael needed exactly 7 minutes to transition between activities, who had memorized their favorite bedtime stories and learned to braid hair from YouTube tutorials. The transformation had been so gradual I'd missed it happening. One day I was Sarah's boyfriend helping out in a crisis, and the next I was scheduling parent-teacher conferences and researching summer camps. The shift occurred in moments so small they seemed insignificant until I looked back and realized they'd fundamentally altered who I was. It started with the practical necessities. 3 children needed structure, routine, predictability. I learned to meal plan and grocery shop for a family. I discovered the art of batch cooking on Sundays, filling my freezer with portions that could be quickly reheated on busy weeknights. I mastered the logistics of getting 3 children ready for school, out the door, and delivered to their respective classrooms by 8 a.m. sharp. My apartment, once a minimalist reflection of my single lifestyle, transformed into a maze of backpacks and art supplies. Legos colonized every surface. The refrigerator disappeared beneath layers of school newsletters, artwork, and pediatrician appointment reminders. My bedroom became a fort-building supply depot, my living room a homework station that doubled as a dance floor when the mood struck. The financial reality was staggering. I'd been a comfortable bachelor, able to afford nice dinners and weekend trips without much planning. Suddenly I was budgeting for school supplies and clothing that would be outgrown within months. Emma needed new shoes every few months as her feet grew. Michael's appetite seemed bottomless, especially after he joined the soccer team. Lily required art supplies in quantities that defied logic for someone so small. Healthcare became a constant concern. Pediatrician visits, dental checkups, eye exams, vaccinations. Each child's medical history was a puzzle I had to piece together from scattered records and Sarah's increasingly unreliable memory. Emma had a mild hearing issue that required monitoring. Michael needed glasses, which he initially refused to wear until I convinced him they made him look like a superhero. Lily was allergic to something we spent months identifying through trial and error. The therapy bills alone threatened to bankrupt me. All 3 children needed individual counseling to process their trauma. Emma worked with a play therapist who specialized in abandonment issues. Michael saw someone who understood the hypervigilance that came from being forced into a parental role too young. Lily needed help managing the rage that had become her default response to disappointment. I attended family therapy sessions where I learned terms like secondary trauma and attachment disorders. I discovered that my own relationship with Sarah had left me with trust issues and hypervigilance. The therapist explained that I was grieving not just the end of my romantic relationship, but the loss of the future I'd imagined with Sarah and her children as a normal, intact family. Sleep became a luxury I could rarely afford. Emma had nightmares several times a week, requiring comfort and reassurance that sometimes took hours to provide. Michael would wake up in the middle of the night to check that his sisters were still there, still safe. Lily was afraid of the dark, requiring a nightlight and an open door and the promise that I was just down the hall. Even when they slept through the night, I often couldn't. My mind raced with worries about their emotional development, their academic progress, their social adjustment. Was I doing enough? Was I doing too much? Was I equipped to handle the complex needs of 3 traumatized children when I'd never even changed a diaper before Emma arrived in my life? My work performance suffered dramatically. I couldn't stay late for important meetings or travel for conferences. I left early for school events and medical appointments. I worked from home when one of them was sick, dividing my attention between conference calls and dispensing juice and sympathy. My boss was understanding to a point, but I could see my career trajectory flattening as I proved unable to prioritize work over family obligations. The social isolation was perhaps the hardest adjustment. My friends' lives continued on their predictable paths of happy hours and weekend adventures, while mine revolved around soccer practices and bedtime routines. Invitations dwindled as I declined them repeatedly, unable to find babysitters or unwilling to leave the children with strangers given their abandonment trauma. Dating became impossible. How do you explain to a potential partner that you're raising your ex-girlfriend's children while she cycles through addiction and recovery? Most people ran when they heard the situation. Others showed interest in me but clearly resented the children's presence in my life. A few tried to be understanding but couldn't handle the complex emotional landscape we navigated daily. I grieved the loss of spontaneity, of quiet mornings and uninterrupted evenings. I missed being able to make decisions based solely on my own preferences. I mourned the simplicity of my former life, even as I discovered unexpected joy in the chaos of family life. Because there was joy, fierce and surprising in its intensity. Michael's face when he scored his first goal and looked for me in the stands. Lily's artwork covering my refrigerator, each piece a small masterpiece of childhood creativity. Emma's laughter when I tickled her, pure and healing after months of tears. The way all 3 of them curled up with me for movie nights, choosing my comfort over the complicated emotions their mother evoked. I learned to celebrate small victories. Emma sleeping through the night without nightmares, Michael laughing at my terrible jokes, Lily having a good day at school without any behavioral incidents. These moments became the fuel that sustained me through the harder days when I questioned every decision I'd made. The children began to trust me in ways that were both humbling and terrifying. They brought me their fears and worries, their scraped knees and hurt feelings. They included me in their bedtime prayers and drew pictures of our family that always featured the four of us together. They began to count on me in ways that made backing out impossible, even when I fantasized about returning to my uncomplicated bachelor life. I discovered I had more patience than I'd ever imagined, and that my capacity for love was larger than I'd known. Not romantic love, but something deeper and more complicated. Protective love, fierce love, the kind of love that makes you willing to rearrange your entire existence around someone else's needs. The learning curve was steep and unforgiving. I made countless mistakes. I lost my temper when exhaustion overwhelmed my better judgment. I handled discipline inconsistently as I figured out what worked for each child's personality. I said the wrong thing at crucial moments, failed to anticipate needs, struggled with decisions that seemed simple to more experienced parents. But I also discovered reserves of strength I didn't know I possessed. I could function on 4 hours of sleep when necessary. I could comfort a crying child while simultaneously helping another with homework and preparing dinner. I could advocate fiercely for their needs at school meetings while remaining calm and professional. I could love children who weren't biologically mine as if they were my own flesh and blood. The moments when they called me dad became less frequent after my initial corrections, but they never stopped entirely. Usually it happened when they were tired or upset, when their guard was down and their true feelings emerged. Each time I felt the same complicated mix of emotions: joy at their acceptance, guilt about taking a role that wasn't originally mine, protectiveness toward children who had learned to attach to whoever provided stability. I stopped correcting them eventually, not because I wanted to replace their father, but because I realized I was fulfilling that role whether I claimed the title or not. I was the one who taught Michael to shave when his peach fuzz began to darken. I was the one who explained periods to Lily when her body began to change. I was the one Emma turned to for comfort when nightmares made sleep impossible. The role had chosen me as much as I'd chosen it. These children needed a father, and circumstances had placed me in that position. I could embrace it fully or continue to hold back, but either way, I was already living the reality of fatherhood. My identity shifted completely during those months. I went from being someone who helped out occasionally to being the primary parent for 3 children with complex needs. My days were structured around their schedules, my decisions filtered through their best interests, my future planning centered on their long-term well-being. I bought a car big enough for car seats and sports equipment. I learned to pack lunches that met each child's preferences and dietary restrictions. I became fluent in the language of childhood: playground politics, homework struggles, friendship drama, growing pains both literal and metaphorical. The most profound change was internal. I discovered I could love people who weren't my biological children as deeply as if they were. I found meaning in sacrifice, purpose in putting someone else's needs before my own. I learned that being needed wasn't a burden when the need came from genuine love and trust. By the time Sarah disappeared for the longest stretch yet, leaving us without contact for 3 months, the children barely seemed to notice. They had found their stability, their security, their sense of home. They had found it in routine bedtimes and consistent meals, in someone who showed up for school events and remembered their favorite snacks. They had found it in me, and I had found something I didn't know I was looking for in them. The day I stopped believing love could save Sarah started like any other Tuesday. I was packing lunches when my phone rang at 7:15 a.m. Sarah's voice was manic, pressured, speaking so fast I could barely understand her words. She was clean, she insisted, had been clean for 6 weeks this time. She was coming to get her bobbies, today, right now. I could hear traffic in the background, horns honking, her breathing irregular. She was already in her car, already driving toward us. The children were eating breakfast, backpacks ready for school, operating within the careful routine we'd built together over 18 months. They looked up at me with concern as my voice grew tense, recognizing the particular stress that Sarah's calls always brought to our home. I tried to reason with her. The children had school. We could arrange a visit for the weekend. We could meet at the park like we usually did, somewhere neutral where the kids felt safe. But Sarah's voice escalated with each suggestion I made. I was stalling, she accused, making excuses to keep her from her own children. I was trying to steal them from her, poison them against her, replace her as their mother. The accusations were familiar by now, but the intensity was new. Usually Sarah's anger burned bright and quick before collapsing into tearful apologies. This felt different, sharper, more dangerous. She hung up after promising she'd be at their school at 3 p.m. to pick them up. I was not to interfere. They were her children, and she was taking them home where they belonged. My hands shook as I called the school, alerting them that under no circumstances should Sarah be allowed to pick up the children. I provided them with copies of the temporary guardianship paperwork I'd carried in my wallet for over a year. The principal assured me they understood, but I could hear the concern in her voice. This wasn't the first time a family crisis had spilled onto school grounds. I drove the children to school that morning with a knot in my stomach that grew tighter with each passing hour. Michael sensed something was wrong and kept asking questions I couldn't answer honestly. Emma clung to my hand longer than usual at drop-off. Lily barely said goodbye, lost in her own world of anxiety that always intensified when Sarah's chaos entered our orbit. At 2:30, I positioned myself in the school parking lot with a clear view of all entrances. My phone was charged, Patricia Chen's number ready to dial, backup plans forming and reforming in my mind. Part of me hoped Sarah wouldn't show up, that this was another empty threat in a long line of promises she couldn't keep. But at 2:55, I saw her car pull erratically into the lot. She parked across 3 spaces, her movements jerky and unpredictable as she got out. Even from a distance, I could see she was high. Her pupils were dilated, her gestures too large, her walk unsteady despite her obvious attempts to appear normal. I intercepted her before she reached the building. She looked worse up close than she had in months. Her clothes were rumpled, her hair unwashed, her skin bearing the telltale marks of someone deep in active addiction. But her eyes burned with a fierce determination that scared me more than her physical deterioration. She demanded to see her children. I explained as calmly as I could that she was in no condition to take them anywhere. This only inflamed her further. She began shouting in the school parking lot, accusing me of kidnapping, of brainwashing her bobbies, of destroying her family out of spite and jealousy. Other parents began to stare. Children walking to their cars stopped to watch the drama unfolding. I tried to guide Sarah away from the building, away from the growing audience, but she planted herself in front of the main entrance and refused to move. When the dismissal bell rang, I made a decision that would haunt me for months afterward. I called the police. The next 20 minutes were a nightmare of sirens and flashing lights. Sarah screamed at the officers that I was stealing her children, that she had rights, that this was all a conspiracy to keep a mother from her bobbies. The children emerged from school to find their mother being handcuffed while she sobbed their names, reaching for them with desperate hands. Emma began crying immediately, the kind of wailing that came from somewhere deep and primal. Lily stood frozen, her face blank with shock. Michael put his arms around his sisters and tried to shield them from the scene, but his own tears were flowing freely. Sarah's eyes found theirs as the officers guided her toward the patrol car. She called out that she loved them, that Mommy was sorry, that this wasn't her fault. She promised she'd come back for them, that no one could keep them from her forever. Her voice broke on their names as the car door closed between them. The children were silent on the drive home. Emma hiccuped occasionally, residual sobs shaking her small frame. Lily stared out the window with an expression I'd never seen before, something between rage and resignation. Michael held himself rigid, trying to be strong for his sisters while processing his own trauma. That night, none of them wanted dinner. Emma wouldn't let me out of her sight, following me from room to room like a shadow. Lily locked herself in the bathroom for an hour, and when she finally emerged, her eyes were red and swollen. Michael sat at the kitchen table staring at his homework without seeing it, his pencil motionless in his hand. I tried to explain what had happened in terms they could understand. Mommy was sick in her brain, and the sickness made her act in ways that weren't safe. The police weren't punishing her, they were trying to help her get better. Sometimes grown-ups had to make hard decisions to keep children safe, even when those decisions felt scary or unfair. But my words felt inadequate against the image burned into their memories, their mother being taken away in handcuffs while they watched helplessly from the school steps. The legal consequences came swiftly. Sarah was charged with public intoxication and attempting to violate a custody order. She spent 3 days in jail before her mother bailated her out, 3 days during which she called my phone obsessively, leaving voicemails that ranged from tearful apologies to furious threats. When she was released, the real campaign began. Sarah launched an all-out assault on my character, using every platform available to her. Social media posts painted me as a manipulative predator who had stolen her children while she was at her most vulnerable. She reached out to mutual friends, to her extended family, to anyone who would listen, spinning a narrative in which I was the villain who had systematically destroyed her relationship with her children. The story she told was compelling in its simplicity. She was a single mother struggling with depression who had asked her boyfriend for temporary help with childcare. Instead of supporting her recovery, I had used her children as leverage to control and punish her. I had poisoned them against her, made them afraid of their own mother, turned them into weapons in my twisted game of revenge. She provided carefully edited screenshots of our text conversations, removing context to make my boundary setting appear cruel and arbitrary. She shared photos of her children looking sad or distant during visits, claiming I had coached them to reject her. She described my financial support as a form of control, my consistency as manipulation, my love for her children as possessiveness. The narrative gained traction because it contained elements of truth twisted beyond recognition. I had been supporting her children financially, but out of necessity rather than control. I had limited her access to them, but based on professional recommendations and their own expressed fears. I had influenced their perception of her, but only by providing the stability she couldn't. Friends began reaching out with concerned questions. Had I really prevented Sarah from seeing her children? Was it true that I'd called the police on her during a mental health crisis? Why hadn't I done more to support her recovery instead of taking her children away? The doubt in their voices cut deeper than Sarah's accusations. These were people who knew me, who had watched me sacrifice everything for 3 children who weren't biologically mine, yet even they were questioning my motives, wondering if there was truth in Sarah's version of events. I found myself constantly defending decisions I'd made to protect the children's well-being. Every boundary I'd set was reframed as evidence of my controlling nature. Every time I'd said no to Sarah's unreasonable requests was presented as proof of my cruelty. Every moment of the children's progress was attributed to their resilience rather than my care. The children sensed the change in atmosphere around us. Michael became hypervigilant again, watching for signs that I might abandon them too. Emma regressed in her potty training and sleep habits. Lily's anger found new targets, exploding at classmates and teachers who had nothing to do with our family drama. Their therapists worked overtime to help them process not just their mother's arrest, but the ongoing character assassination that painted the one stable adult in their lives as dangerous and manipulative. I increased their session frequency and added family therapy sessions where we could work together on managing the stress of Sarah's campaign. The legal system moved slowly. Restraining orders were filed and contested. Custody hearings were scheduled and postponed. Sarah's lawyer painted me as an opportunistic predator while mine focused on documented patterns of neglect and abandonment. The children were appointed their own advocate, a guardian ad litem who would represent their best interests independent of both Sarah's and my wishes. Through it all, Sarah's narrative evolved and intensified. I hadn't just taken her children, I had systematically destroyed her life. I hadn't just supported them financially, I had used money to manipulate and control. I hadn't just provided stability, I had brainwashed them against their own mother. The most painful accusation was that I had never loved her at all, that I had targeted her specifically because she was vulnerable, that my entire relationship with her had been a calculated plan to steal her children. This revision of our history erased every genuine moment we'd shared, every time I'd tried to help her get clean, every tear I'd shed over her struggles. But perhaps the cruelest twist was how she weaponized the children's adjustment and happiness. Their improved grades became evidence that I'd pressured them to perform. Their laughter during our family activities was presented as proof they'd been coached to reject her memory. Their growing independence was framed as my manipulation rather than their natural healing. I realized with devastating clarity that no amount of love, patience, or sacrifice would ever be enough for Sarah. She had chosen addiction over her children repeatedly, but in her mind, I was the one who had stolen them from her. She had abandoned them emotionally and physically, but I was the villain for providing what she couldn't. The children began asking questions I couldn't answer. Why was Mommy saying I was mean to her? Why did people think I was bad when I took care of them? Why couldn't Mommy just get better and be nice like other mommies? I had no adequate explanations for the inexplicable. How do you tell children that their mother's brain has been so damaged by addiction that she can't distinguish between help and harm? How do you explain that love sometimes looks like cruelty to someone whose perception has been warped by drugs and denial? The day I finally accepted that love wasn't enough came during a particularly brutal family therapy session. The therapist asked me directly whether I still hoped Sarah would recover and reclaim her role as the children's mother. The answer that came out surprised me with its finality. I hoped she would get clean for her own sake, but I no longer believed she could be the mother her children needed. Too much damage had been done, too many promises had been broken, too much poison had been injected into her relationship with them. The children deserved better than waiting for someone who might never arrive. They deserved the certainty of permanent love rather than the chaos of conditional availability. They deserved a future built on stability rather than hope for someone else's recovery. That night, I made the call I'd been avoiding for months. I asked my lawyer to begin proceedings for permanent custody. Not temporary guardianship with the hope of eventual reunification, but full legal adoption that would make me their father in the eyes of the law. The decision felt like both an ending and a beginning. The end of my relationship with Sarah, the death of the family I'd once imagined we could become, but also the beginning of something new, a commitment to these children that was permanent, unconditional, and mine to make. Love hadn't been enough to save Sarah, but it would be enough to save her children. 2 years after that day in the school parking lot, we had become something I never expected, a real family. Not the traditional kind that appears in holiday cards, but something more complex and perhaps more meaningful. A family forged by choice, necessity, and the kind of love that develops slowly, deliberately, without the biological imperative that drives most parent-child relationships. The legal adoption was finalized on a rainy Thursday in October. Judge Martinez signed the papers that made me Michael, Emma, and Lily's legal father while they sat beside me in their best clothes, solemn with the weight of the moment. Emma, now 6, whispered to ask if this meant I couldn't leave them anymore. When I assured her that was exactly what it meant, she smiled for the first time in weeks. The courthouse ceremony was attended by Patricia Chen, their therapists, and my parents, who had flown in from Phoenix to witness what my mother called the most important day of our family's life. Sarah was notably absent, though she had been given notice of the proceedings. Her lawyer informed the court that she did not contest the adoption, a decision that felt both like victory and abandonment. Michael, now 14, understood the significance better than his sisters. He'd lived through enough instability to appreciate the weight of permanent commitment. That night he thanked me for choosing them, his voice thick with emotion he rarely allowed himself to express. I told him he didn't need to thank me for doing what any parent would do, but we both knew that wasn't entirely true. Many people would have walked away long before reaching this point. Transition from temporary guardian to legal father changed something fundamental in our dynamic. The children had always been mine in every way that mattered, but the legal recognition gave us all permission to stop waiting for someone else to reclaim them. They could fully invest in our relationship without the underlying fear that it might be temporary. I could make long-term decisions about their education, their health care, their future without wondering if Sarah might resurface with legal challenges. We moved to a larger apartment that fall, one with 3 bedrooms and enough space for all of us to have privacy when we needed it. Michael finally got his own room, decorated with soccer posters and the kind of organized chaos that teenage boys seem to require. The girls shared a room they turned into a wonderland of stuffed animals and art supplies, their creativity spilling out into every corner of our new home. I had evolved into the kind of father I never expected to become. I knew which foods each child would actually eat versus what they claimed to like. I could braid hair in 4 different styles and tie soccer cleats so they stayed tied through entire games. I had memorized their friends' names, their teachers' preferences, their individual fears and dreams and quirks. Emma had blossomed into a confident first grader who no longer wet the bed or clung to me with desperate intensity. She made friends easily and brought home artwork she created with the fearless creativity of a child who felt secure enough to express herself. Her nightmares had largely stopped, replaced by dreams she described enthusiastically over breakfast. Lily, now 10, had channeled her anger into artistic expression and academic achievement. She was reading at a high school level and creating paintings that astonished her teachers. The rage that had once exploded unpredictably had transformed into passionate advocacy for causes she cared about. She started a recycling program at school and organized clothing drives for families in need. Michael's transformation was the most subtle but perhaps most significant. He had gradually released the hypervigilant caretaker role he'd assumed at age 12, trusting me to handle adult responsibilities while he focused on being a teenager. He joined the varsity soccer team, made friends who knew nothing about his complicated history, and even brought a girl home for dinner once, proudly introducing me as his dad. But Sarah's absence wasn't absolute. She existed in our lives like a ghost, present in the children's occasional questions and my own complicated grief. Her social media presence continued sporadically, posting cryptic messages about children being stolen and love being betrayed. Mutual friends would sometimes mention seeing her around town, looking thin and aged beyond her years. The children's relationships with their mother's memory were complex and evolving. Emma, who had been youngest when Sarah disappeared, remembered her more as a feeling than a person. She knew she had another mommy once, but I was the parent who felt real and present in her daily experience. Lily maintained the strongest anger toward Sarah, though she rarely expressed it directly. She would become sullen around Mother's Day, refusing to participate in school activities that celebrated maternal relationships. She once told her therapist that she had a mom who chose drugs and a dad who chose them, and she knew which choice meant more. Michael's relationship with Sarah's memory was the most complicated. He remembered her at her best, before addiction fully consumed her capacity for motherhood. He mourned not just the mother he'd lost, but the childhood that had been sacrificed to her chaos. Sometimes I caught him looking at photos of the four of us from happier times, his expression unreadable. Their therapists helped us navigate these complex emotions without trying to erase Sarah from their history. She was part of their story, part of who they had become, even if she couldn't be part of their future. They learned to hold space for loving someone who had hurt them, for grieving someone who was still alive, for accepting that some questions would never have satisfying answers. My own dating life remained non-existent, partly by choice and partly by circumstance. The few women who expressed interest invariably balked when they learned about my ready-made family and the drama surrounding our formation. I told myself I was too busy for romance, too focused on the children's needs to pursue my own, but the truth was more complex. I had loved Sarah deeply, and her betrayal had left scars that went beyond the obvious damage. I had trusted completely and been manipulated ruthlessly. I had offered everything and been painted as a villain when it wasn't enough. The experience had made me wary of allowing anyone else close enough to hurt not just me, but the children who depended on my stability. There was also the practical reality that any future relationship would have to accommodate 3 children with complex needs and traumatic histories. Potential partners would need to understand that my children came first always, without exception. They would need to accept that bedtime routines and school events and soccer practices took precedence over spontaneous dates and romantic weekends. The financial pressure had eased somewhat as my career recovered from the chaos of Sarah's addiction. I received regular raises and eventually a promotion that came with a salary increase large enough to make our lives more comfortable. We could afford family vacations now, trips to the beach and camping adventures that created positive memories to balance the traumatic ones. I learned to be intentional about building traditions that belonged uniquely to us. We instituted pizza and movie night every Friday, each child taking turns choosing the film. We started a garden on our apartment balcony, growing vegetables that we harvested and cooked together. We adopted a rescue dog named Charlie who became the 4th member of our household, providing unconditional love and endless entertainment. The children's academic and social development flourished in the stability we'd created. Michael made honor roll consistently and was being recruited by colleges for soccer scholarships. Lily's artistic talents earned her recognition in local competitions and admission to a gifted program at school. Emma was reading voraciously and showing an aptitude for mathematics that surprised her teachers. But perhaps more importantly, they were learning to be children again, to trust that adults would keep their promises, provide for their needs, and protect them from harm. They were developing the emotional skills to form healthy relationships, express their feelings appropriately, and believe in their own worth. The extended family relationships that had been strained during the custody battles gradually healed. My parents, initially overwhelmed by suddenly having 3 grandchildren, had embraced their new role completely. They visited regularly, remembered birthdays and holidays, and provided the kind of unconditional grandparent love that helped heal some of the children's trust issues. Sarah's family remained more complicated. Her mother, Patricia's grandmother, maintained sporadic contact with the children, sending birthday cards and occasional gifts. She had chosen to believe Sarah's version of events, but seemed to understand that the children were better off in stable custody. Her visits were supervised and infrequent, tinged with sadness for the daughter she'd lost to addiction and the grandchildren she barely knew. The children began referring to me as Dad without hesitation or self-consciousness. It happened gradually, naturally, until one day I realized they hadn't called me by my first name in months. The title felt earned rather than claimed, the result of years of showing up consistently rather than biological accident. People who met us casually assumed we were a traditional family. The children looked enough like me that strangers didn't question our relationship. They had my mannerisms, my sense of humor, my values because those were what they'd absorbed during their formative years. In every way that mattered, they were mine and I was theirs. The trauma of their early experiences hadn't disappeared, but it had been integrated into their identities in healthier ways. They understood that some parents struggle with problems that make them unable to care for their children properly. They knew that families could be formed by choice as well as biology. They had learned that love was demonstrated through actions, not just words. There were still difficult days. Michael sometimes struggled with anger about the childhood he'd lost to adult responsibilities. Lily occasionally tested boundaries with the kind of intensity that suggested deeper fears about abandonment. Emma still needed extra reassurance when routines changed or when I had to travel for work. But these challenges felt manageable within the context of normal family life rather than crisis management. We had tools for dealing with problems, support systems to help when things got difficult, and the security that came from knowing we were committed to each other permanently. The most profound change was internal. I had discovered that love could be chosen rather than just felt, that commitment could be deeper than biology, that family could be created through intention and sustained through consistency. I had learned that being needed wasn't a burden when it came from genuine connection rather than manipulation. Looking back at the terrified man who had answered Michael's call that November night, I barely recognized myself. That person had been well-meaning but naive, unprepared for the complexities of addiction and trauma, motivated by romantic love and good intentions. I had become someone harder and softer simultaneously, more realistic about human nature but more committed to protection and nurture. We had built something beautiful from the wreckage of Sarah's addiction, not despite the trauma, but incorporating it into a stronger foundation. The children had learned resilience, and I had learned unconditional love. Together, we had created the family that none of us had started with, but all of us needed. It wasn't the family I had imagined when I first fell in love with Sarah. It was better, more honest, more intentional, more genuinely connected, built on choice rather than circumstance, sustained by commitment rather than convenience. We had become each other's home. Present day finds us living in a house with a backyard where Charlie chases squirrels, and the children have built a treehouse that violates at least 3 building codes. Michael is 17 now, 6 feet tall and thinking about colleges, his acceptance letters arriving weekly to our mailbox. Emma is 8 and learning to ride a bike without training wheels, her gap-toothed smile replaced by adult front teeth that seem too big for her face. Lily is 12 and has discovered that she can make me laugh until I cry with her spot-on impressions of her teachers. We have become the family that exists in everyday moments rather than crisis interventions. Saturday mornings when everyone sleeps late and we make pancakes together, flour somehow ending up in places flour should never be. Weeknight dinners where we actually sit at the table and talk about our days, no phones allowed, complaints about homework mixing with excitement about school plays and soccer games. Sarah's absence has become a fact of life rather than an active wound. She exists in our story like a prologue that explains how we began but doesn't dictate how we continue. The children mention her occasionally, usually prompted by school assignments about family history or chance encounters with people who knew her before. Their questions have evolved from desperate pleas for her return to matter-of-fact curiosity about someone who used to be important to them. Michael is the one who remembers her most clearly, and his memories have complicated over time. He can recall moments when she was fully present as a mother, helping with homework or reading bedtime stories. But those memories are shadowed by the anxiety he felt even then, the hypervigilance that came from never knowing which version of his mother would appear on any given day. He's applying to colleges now, and we've had the conversation about whether to include Sarah in his application essays. Some schools ask about overcoming adversity, and his story of resilience in the face of parental addiction could be compelling. But he's chosen to write about other challenges, other triumphs. He wants to be known for who he is now rather than what he survived. Lily's relationship with her mother's memory is the most conflicted. She's at an age where friends are becoming interested in boys and experimenting with makeup, normal preteen concerns that highlight the absence of maternal guidance in her life. Sometimes she asks what Sarah was like at her age, whether she would have been the kind of mom who helped with hair and makeup and boy problems. I do my best to answer honestly, sharing memories of Sarah's humor and creativity while acknowledging that addiction changed her fundamental nature. Lily listens to these stories with the kind of hunger that suggests she's trying to piece together an identity that includes but isn't defined by her mother's failures. Emma barely remembers Sarah as a real person, and I've made peace with that being perhaps the kindest outcome. She knows she has a biological mother who couldn't take care of her, but I'm the parent who feels real and present in her experience. She sometimes asks practical questions about why some kids live with different grown-ups than the ones who made them, and I explain that families form in many different ways. Their friends know pieces of our story but not the dramatic details. They know the children are adopted, that their biological mother had problems, that their dad stepped up when someone needed to. The children themselves have learned to share as much or as little of their history as feels comfortable, understanding that their story is theirs to tell or not tell as they choose. The legal battles are long over. Sarah's parental rights were terminated through a process that felt both necessary and heartbreaking. Her signature on the documents was shaky, suggesting she was using at the time she signed them. I wondered if she fully understood what she was giving up, or if the drugs had already erased her capacity to comprehend the magnitude of that loss. Sarah herself has become a cautionary tale whispered among parents in our community. Someone who had everything: beautiful children, a supportive partner, family resources, and lost it all to addiction. I've stopped defending her when people speak of her with contempt, not because I don't understand her disease, but because her children don't need to hear their father making excuses for someone who abandoned them. The last confirmed sighting was 18 months ago when she was arrested for possession with intent to distribute. The mugshot that appeared in the local paper showed someone I barely recognized, aged decades beyond her actual years. Her eyes held no recognition, no spark of the intelligence and humor that had first attracted me. Addiction had erased the person I once loved, leaving behind a stranger wearing her face. I felt sadness when I saw that photo, but not the crushing grief that Sarah's destruction once inspired. I mourned her as I would mourn anyone whose life had been consumed by disease, but she was no longer central to my emotional landscape. The children didn't see the mugshot, and I didn't share news of her arrest. They deserved to remember whatever good they could of her without being haunted by images of her destruction. My own life has expanded beyond the constraints that single parenthood initially imposed. I've learned to balance my role as their father with my own needs and interests. I started dating again last year, carefully and cautiously, making it clear from the beginning that any relationship would need to accommodate 3 children who were non-negotiable priorities. I met Jennifer at a parent meeting for Michael's soccer team. Her son plays defense to Michael's midfield, and we bonded initially over our shared experiences of weekend tournaments and travel teams. She's divorced with 1 child, familiar with the complexities of blended families and step-parenting dynamics. The children like her, which feels like a minor miracle given their history with adults who have disappointed them. She doesn't try to replace anyone or fix anything. She simply adds her presence to our family activities when invited, bringing her own son along to soccer games and barbecues and movie nights. Michael has started calling her by her first name instead of the formal address he uses with most adults, a sign of acceptance that took months to develop. Lily shows her artwork and asks for advice about friend drama, treating her like a trusted aunt rather than a threat to our family dynamics. Emma holds her hand during scary parts of movies and has started including her in the bedtime hug rotation. I'm not sure where our relationship will lead, but the children know that whatever happens, they remain my first priority. Jennifer understands this and respects it, having made similar commitments to her own child. We're building something slowly, carefully, with full awareness of how much damage rushed relationships can cause to children who have already experienced too much loss. The financial stability I've achieved has allowed us to live without the constant stress that marked our early years together. We take family vacations now, create photo albums full of beaches and hiking trails and theme parks. The children have college funds and their own savings accounts, lessons in financial responsibility that they'll need regardless of their career choices. Michael's soccer skills have attracted interest from several universities, and we've started the surreal process of campus visits and scholarship negotiations. He's matured into a thoughtful young man who understands the value of the stability we've built together. His friends often gravitate toward our house, drawn by the kind of predictable warmth that comes from secure family relationships. Lily has discovered that she has a gift for writing in addition to her artistic talents. Her short stories are dark and beautiful, processing themes of abandonment and resilience with a sophistication that sometimes concerns her teachers. Her therapist assures me that creative expression is a healthy way to work through trauma, and that Lily's writing suggests she's integrating her experiences rather than being consumed by them. Emma is simply a normal 8-year-old girl who loves horses and hates Brussels sprouts and believes that she can be president someday if she studies hard enough. She's the least marked by our complicated beginning, secure in the knowledge that she is loved unconditionally by someone who chose to be her father. We've created traditions that belong entirely to us, rituals that have nothing to do with the chaos we emerged from. Every year on the anniversary of the night Michael called me, we have what we call Family Day. We look through photo albums, talk about how far we've all come, and make plans for the future. It's become a celebration of choice and commitment rather than a commemoration of crisis. The children understand that they were not abandoned because they were unlovable, but because their mother was sick in a way that made her unable to love consistently. They know that families can be formed intentionally, that love can be chosen and sustained through commitment rather than just felt spontaneously. This understanding has made them more compassionate toward other children dealing with family instability. Michael mentors younger kids whose parents are going through divorce. Lily befriends the quiet children at school who seem lost or lonely. Emma shares her toys with visitors and includes everyone in games, having learned that kindness can make someone feel like they belong. People sometimes ask if I regret the choices I made, if I ever wonder what my life would have looked like without the complications of sudden parenthood. The question assumes that my life was somehow diminished by taking on responsibilities that weren't originally mine. But I look at Michael preparing for college with the confidence that comes from knowing he has unconditional support. I watch Lily create art that transforms pain into beauty. I see Emma approaching the world with the fearless curiosity of a child who has never doubted that she is wanted and protected. This is not the life I planned when I was 28 and falling in love with a woman whose smile made me believe in happy endings. But it's the life I've built deliberately, choice by choice, day by day, commitment by commitment. It's better than what I originally imagined because it's been earned rather than assumed, chosen rather than simply received. The children have given me purpose beyond my own ambitions, love deeper than romance, satisfaction more profound than career achievement. I have watched them heal and grow and thrive, knowing that my consistency helped make that possible. I have been present for first steps and lost teeth and broken hearts and academic achievements and teenage rebellion and all the mundane miracles that make up a childhood. Sarah's absence created space for something else to grow, not better or worse than what might have been, but different, more intentional, more grateful, more aware of how precious and fragile family connections can be. We are not perfect, we argue about chores and homework and screen time limits. The children push boundaries and test my patience and make mistakes that require patience and consequences. I lose my temper occasionally and doubt my decisions and worry that I'm failing them in ways I can't see. But we are real, we are committed, we are home to each other in ways that transcend biology and legal documents and social expectations. We have built something together that none of us could have created alone. That's what family is in the end, not the people you're born to, but the people you choose to love consistently, day after day, regardless of how difficult that choice sometimes becomes. We chose each other, and that choice has made all the difference. 6 months ago, Sarah died alone in a hospital room from complications related to her addiction. The call came from a social worker who had tracked me down through old custody records, asking if I was still the emergency contact for someone named Sarah Martinez. The children were at school when I received the news, and I had 8 hours to figure out how to tell them that their mother was gone forever. I'd always imagined this moment differently. In my mind, Sarah's death would bring closure, answers, perhaps even relief. Instead, I felt hollow, suspended between grief for someone I'd once loved deeply and sadness for the resolution that would never come. She would never apologize to her children. She would never explain her choices. She would never get the chance to become the mother they deserved, and they would never get the chance to forgive her. The funeral was sparsely attended. Sarah's mother, frail and bitter, sat in the front row beside a few relatives who whispered among themselves about what a waste it all was. A handful of people from various treatment programs paid their respects, understanding the particular tragedy of addiction claimed another life. I sat in the back with the children, unsure of our place in this final chapter of Sarah's story. Michael, now 17 and taller than me, held his composure with the stoicism he'd learned too young. His jaw was tight, his eyes dry, his hands steady as he signed the guest book. But I saw him flinch when the pastor spoke about Sarah's love for her children, when strangers who'd never met them offered condolences about losing their mother. Lily cried angry tears, frustrated by emotions she couldn't name or control. She'd spent years constructing a careful relationship with her mother's memory, and Sarah's death had collapsed those careful boundaries. How do you mourn someone who is already gone? How do you grieve someone who chose absence over presence, addiction over family, destruction over love? Emma, 10 now and old enough to understand death but not abandonment, was confused by the day's solemnity. She knew her biological mother had died, but the woman in the casket was a stranger to her. The parent she mourned was the fantasy mother she'd never had, not the person who'd actually lived and died without knowing her. Sarah's eulogy was delivered by a counselor from her last treatment program, someone who spoke about her struggles and her attempts at recovery. She mentioned Sarah's children briefly, describing them as her greatest regret and deepest love. I wanted to stand up and object, to point out that love requires action, not just feeling. But the children didn't need their father making scenes at their mother's funeral. After the service, Sarah's mother approached us with accusations that had clearly been rehearsed. We were the reason Sarah never got clean. My interference had driven her to despair. The children's absence from her life had destroyed her will to live. Every failure in Sarah's recovery was somehow our fault, our responsibility, our tragedy to bear. I listened without responding, understanding that grief makes people cruel, that blame is easier than acceptance. The children stood beside me, united in their discomfort, waiting for permission to leave this place where their complicated history was being rewritten by someone who'd enabled Sarah's addiction while condemning those who tried to save her children from it. In the car afterward, we sat in silence for several minutes before Michael spoke. He said he was glad Sarah wasn't suffering anymore, but he wished she'd gotten better while she was alive. Lily said she felt guilty for not being sadder, for feeling more relief than grief. Emma asked if dying meant Sarah finally understood how much she'd hurt them. I told them there were no right ways to feel about losing someone who was already lost to them. That loving someone and being angry with them weren't mutually exclusive. That Sarah's death changed nothing about the life we'd built together, the family we'd become, the love we shared every day. That night I found myself going through old photos, remembering the woman I'd fallen in love with before addiction stole her away. Sarah laughing at something silly I'd said, Sarah helping Emma with a puzzle, Sarah dancing in the kitchen while dinner cooked. These moments had been real, even though they'd been followed by years of chaos and abandonment. I grieved for the family we might have been if addiction hadn't inserted itself into our story. I mourned the mother Sarah could have been, the grandmother she'd never become, the woman whose intelligence and humor had been consumed by drugs and desperation. I cried for the first time since the night she'd abandoned her children, not just for her death, but for the life she'd thrown away. But my grief was finite, bounded by acceptance and time. Sarah had made her choices repeatedly, consistently, with full knowledge of what she was sacrificing. I couldn't save her from those choices, and her children couldn't heal her with their love or forgive her into recovery. Some people are too broken to be fixed, too sick to be saved, too lost to find their way home. The children processed her death in their individual ways. Michael threw himself into college applications and soccer training, channeling his emotions into achievements Sarah would never witness. Lily wrote poetry about absent mothers and complicated love, her words raw with the pain of never having the relationship she'd always wanted. Emma drew pictures of families with missing pieces, trying to understand how someone could be both mother and stranger. Their therapists helped them navigate the unique grief of losing someone who'd been absent long before they died. They learned to mourn not just Sarah's death, but the mother she'd never been, the relationship they'd never had, the closure that would never come. They discovered that forgiveness was possible even when the person being forgiven couldn't acknowledge their need for it. Sarah's death brought unexpected consequences. Distant relatives emerged with opinions about the children's future, as if her death had somehow invalidated my legal parenthood. Social workers made courtesy calls to ensure the children were coping appropriately, while meaning friends offered condolences that felt hollow given the complicated nature of our loss. But these intrusions were brief, manageable, ultimately meaningless. The children were legally mine, emotionally secure, developmentally thriving. Sarah's death was a punctuation mark in our story, not a new chapter. We had built something strong enough to withstand this final disruption, this last piece of chaos from someone who'd brought so much uncertainty into our lives. The hardest part was helping the children understand that Sarah's death didn't require their forgiveness or their guilt. They didn't need to pretend they'd had a relationship they'd never experienced. They didn't need to mourn someone who'd been a stranger to them. They could acknowledge her death without letting it define their emotional landscape. Michael spoke at our family meeting the week after the funeral, his voice steady but his words carefully chosen. He said he was sorry Sarah died, sorry she never got the help she needed, sorry she'd missed out on knowing who they'd become. But he didn't want her death to make them sad about the life they'd built together. He was proud of our family, grateful for the stability we'd created, excited about the future we were building. Lily added that she'd stopped being angry at Sarah when she realized that staying angry hurt her more than it hurt anyone else. She'd learned to separate her mother's choices from her own worth, Sarah's failures from her own potential. She wanted to remember the few good memories they had while refusing to let Sarah's problems become her inheritance. Emma, with the clarity that sometimes comes from youth, said she was sad that Sarah had been sick but happy that she had a dad who chose to take care of them. She didn't understand why some grown-ups made bad choices, but she knew that good grown-ups helped kids even when it was hard. Their words reminded me why I'd fought so hard to keep them, why I'd sacrificed my original plans for their security. These children had emerged from chaos with wisdom, from abandonment with the capacity to love, from trauma with resilience that humbled me. They were not defined by what had happened to them, but by how they'd chosen to respond to it. Jennifer was present for much of this process, offering support without trying to insert herself into decisions that belonged to our family. She understood that Sarah's death was our loss to process, our grief to navigate, our healing to achieve. Her presence was steady and undemanding, the kind of support that felt like love without requiring anything in return. We're talking about marriage now, Jennifer and I, though we're taking our time to ensure the children are ready for that transition. Michael will graduate and leave for college next year, beginning his own independent life. Lily and Emma need to feel secure in their relationship with Jennifer before we formalize our commitment to each other. The children have opinions about our potential wedding, practical concerns about whether Jennifer's son will become their brother, logistical questions about how blended families work. Their questions are normal, healthy, focused on the future rather than haunted by the past. They want to know how our expanded family will function, not whether they'll be abandoned again. Looking back at the man who answered Michael's desperate phone call that November night, I see someone who thought love was simple, that good intentions were enough, that families were either functional or broken with no middle ground. I was naive about addiction, unprepared for the complexities of trauma, optimistic about my ability to fix what wasn't mine to repair. But I was also someone who didn't hesitate when children needed help, who prioritized their safety over my comfort, who chose consistency over convenience. The person I've become was shaped by those early choices, refined by years of challenge and growth, strengthened by the daily practice of unconditional love. The children are not the only ones who were rescued in this story. They saved me from a shallow existence focused on career advancement and personal pleasure. They taught me that meaning comes from service, that love grows through commitment, that family is built through choice rather than chance. Michael will leave for college in 8 months, beginning his own journey toward independence and adulthood. Lily is discovering her own talents and interests, developing the confidence that comes from knowing she's unconditionally supported. Emma is simply growing up in a family where love is demonstrated daily through presence, attention, and consistent care. This is not the family I planned when I was 28 and falling in love with someone whose smile made me believe in happy endings. But it's the family I've chosen, day by day, decision by decision, through crisis and calm, through doubt and certainty. Sarah's death closed a chapter that had been ending for years. She was gone long before she died, lost to addiction and the choices that destroyed her capacity for motherhood. Her physical death simply made official what had been true for years. These children were mine and I was theirs, bound together by love that was chosen rather than inherited. We don't speak of her often now, but when we do, it's with the kind of complicated compassion that comes from understanding that some people are too sick to be saved. We remember her laughter, her creativity, her love for them when she was capable of love. We acknowledge the pain she caused while refusing to let that pain define our relationships with each other. Sometimes Emma asks if Sarah would be proud of who they've become. I tell her yes because I believe that's true. Somewhere beneath the addiction and chaos was a mother who wanted good things for her children, even if she couldn't provide them herself. That mother would be amazed by Michael's maturity, Lily's artistic gifts, Emma's fearless curiosity about the world. But mostly we focus on the present and future. College applications and art competitions and bike rides and bedtime stories. The daily miracles of family life that have nothing to do with our complicated beginning and everything to do with the love we've chosen to build together. This is who we are now, not a cautionary tale about addiction or a heartwarming story about rescue. Just a family, imperfect and real, built on commitment rather than biology, sustained by choice rather than obligation. We are each other's home, each other's safe harbor, each other's proof that love can triumph over chaos when it's backed by consistency and courage. Sarah is gone, but we remain. We remain together, we remain committed, we remain grateful for the unexpected gift of finding each other in the wreckage of someone else's destruction. We remain a family, not despite our complicated beginning, but because of our intentional choices every day since. There's no going back to who we were before. We can only move forward as who we've become. A father and 3 children who chose each other when choosing was all we had left.